bank MD that you're talking about was asked to refund monies and property totaling 191 billion naira.
Precisely.
Okay. When Mrs. Waziri came into power, you said corruption was fighting back.
Precisely.
But she was, within that period she was there, she successfully started about 50 cases and was able to achieve some level of conviction.
Yeah, those convictions we would need to know. So we have set 50 cases. How many of them were conviction? That is very important. They also claim, I can remember one of the civil society organizations who wrote to EFCC demanding for evidence when Madam Waziri said about 11 billion naira has been recovered. We didn't get any response to that. There were no proofs. And that is where I'm saying, you can see, even where you can say a semblance of conviction, you can see compromised convictions. You can see situations where people were just slapped on the wrist. You can see situations where corruption completely, even before the international community, and that's why you can see most of the donors, the partners, were withdrawing from supporting the EFCC. You can see corruption losing steam seriously.
Sorry to butt in there. On the day she came, you also were in our studios, and you remember then she did say she was never given any file whatsoever, trying to answer allegations from people who say the former EFCC chairman, Olanrewaju, actually was investigating loads and loads of former governors, which she said she was never handed over such files. Did your movement and some other activists try to find out if truly there was any kind of investigation going on?
Yeah, there were several demands, and unfortunately I made it clear here, as one of them was pointedly when we asked her, it was there when the news was broken by 234 Next, that she actually wrote letter of clearance to Obong Victor Atta, Marwa, and James Ibori, when they were contesting, and the letters were written to the Metropolitan Police to say that they were not under any form of investigation. And I said it here. And it was interesting for me that she was also listening to the program outside in your waiting room. I said that they didn't respond. Under the FOI Act, we wrote to request that you are bound under this Act to provide information as a public institution. Not even only public, private institutions are also covered under the FOI Act. We demanded for evidence to say they never acknowledge. That is the irony of it. The unfortunate thing, the civil society, the state of proceeding that you see most of those facing corruption charges going to court to go and get is not allowed under the EFCC Act. Under Section 40 of the EFCC Act, that was one of the achievements that the civil society can point to under the review of the EFCC Act, because we lobbied to say this is what we are going to experience. So under the Act, it needs to be there that this would not in any way be enough to impede the process of prosecuting people that are alleged. We'll
come back to the Act again, because the National Assembly has said that it plans to do another review of that particular Act, so that you would also let us in on what areas you would like to see some kind of review. But again, looking at what we have before us here, they talk about some ongoing high-profile cases from 2007 to 2010. We can even add some of them now because of the ongoing case with the last Assembly Speaker. Looking at these, they say some of them were actually inherited case file. For instance, the Ayefayoshe, former governor of Ekiti State, he was granted bail in 2007, and they say there's another inherited case file. Loads and loads and loads of them. Iyabo Obasanjo, at that time serving senator, inherited case file since April of 2008. You look at all of this, they say there's a possibility that if she had gotten that special court she had wanted, she clamored for, all of these wouldn't have been pending.
Actually, for me, that I've always been against that demand for the special court, because we don't need to start having people exposed to all manners of influences and pressure. So the normal court, we've had it between the 2002 and 2007 that EFCC, but before Madam Farida came into office, we've had several prosecutions and we've had several convictions. These were handled by judges. These were handled by the same judges that are there now and the same lawyers that are also approaching the court. But the fact remains that they need to determine, before even granting injunctions and the rest of that. They assess the seriousness of the institutions that are concerned. You can see situation before, even then, that were criticizing the EFCC with regard to that they were detaining people probably longer than it was necessary. You would recall, and lawyers would also attest to this, that it was under the regime of no rebuttal that they started the process of getting a court order to detain people for more than 48 hours. Under that process, it is the same EFCC cell that they keep people prior going to court. But the moment the court is either granting them bail or remanding them, they don't go back to EFCC cell. But that is what happens from 2008 up to this moment. Most of the high-profile guys, once they take them to court, they plead with the court and then they take them back to, because they don't want to go to prison. And for them,
back to where?
Sorry?
They take them back to where?
They take them back to EFCC cell. You can see your argument. Even some of them will come to court and say they were being tortured by EFCC. And then when they say they should take them to prison, their lawyers will say no, they prefer to go back to EFCC cell. Because they believe that there should be separate cells for them than the other criminals. You understand? But people who steals 100,000, 100 naira, 10 naira are taken to cells and prisons. But it is a matter of the seriousness, commitment, and genuineness of the institutions that the judges will also look at. You can imagine a situation where about 151 count charge was brought against Ibori, and none of them can be sustained in court.
But how influential are these PEPs now on this commission? Now, the politically exposed persons, how influential are they to the decision of the government and those who appoint the chairman of the commission?
Looking at the decision to sack Madam Farida Waziri, or prior to her removal?
Both.
Prior to her removal, I mean, it was very clear. They were responsible for the emergence of Madam Farida Waziri. They were responsible for the removal of so many other internationally trained investigators and prosecutors under the EFCC. They were responsible for complete undermining of that institution.
So were there facts to that some eggheads in the commission were removed?
A huge number of them. So many of them that were even handling those cases that Madam Farida said they don't have the files to them. There are quite a number of them that were transferred out. There are quite a number of them that were even killed, because some of them were still holding the files, or they still have the softwares to most of the cases that they were handling before they were transferred out of the commission. So it is still, and that is why I said it is important for us to celebrate the person of Madam Farida being removed from the office, but it's also important for us to be concerned about the removal of the EFCC chairperson. So that is what I was trying to tell you, that we need to separate the two issues. We need to be concerned that there must be that security of tenure in office, especially for an institution like an anti-graft agency.
So it brings us to the appointment of the chairman. Who appoints the chairman? Who pays the chairman?
Precisely. So if we're talking about, and that is why the review of the act will be very, very important. When this needs to be done, then there must be a basis for the public to know, and the process needs to be followed that will lead to removal of such a person ahead of the expiration of the tenure. So it is not just going to be enough for the president to wake up one day and say, get out of office.
What would you have loved to see in this kind of process now, leading up to appointment of someone in this office now? What would you have loved to see?
It is very important that there has to be a body that will be responsible for shortlisting people that will be nominated by the general public. And that body will screen them, and then the general public will be allowed to also send in, either petitions or memoranda or complaints about such individuals before they are in any way subjected to the final ratification of the National Assembly. And it is important that in all this, the president should completely be removed from the process. The National Assembly should be responsible for the process of even constituting the small body that will be responsible for shortlisting and screening these individuals.
But this
After
National
that process,
Assembly is made up of people who have been politically exposed.
No, these are the people that the EFCC assisted them in getting into the National Assembly. These are people that are supposed to either be in jail by now or facing prosecutions, or should have not in any way been cleared by INEC to have even stand for an election. But because the anti-corruption institutions has completely failed, and that is why it is important. When we want to look at this situation, we need to see what is the anti-corruption agenda of the current government. And that is one thing that can help us to situate the action that was just taken yesterday. If we can see a reform that is not just restricted to EFCC, but that is looking at generally the anti-corruption agenda of the government, the anti-corruption institution holistically. Situation where the government will come up with a blueprint and say, we want to reposition the anti-corruption fight in Nigeria, and these are how we want to go about it. Submit a review process or memoranda to the National Assembly for consideration, and then we can say, okay, we have a new era that probably would herald the emergence of a sincere and genuine anti-corruption crusade in Nigeria. But where we can just see pockets of action like this, it gives a huge cause for concern to each and every one of us, and we need to get it clear before we just assist the government in achieving an agenda that is not in the interest of Nigeria.